Welcome to CPA Australia's Sound Business, podcasting for business and the accounting profession.
Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Mark Morris and I'm a Senior Tax Counsel with CPA Australia. The topic of today's podcast is to discuss some of the myths and preconceptions associated with franchising. And to lead us through that process, it's my great pleasure to invite today's special guest, Jason Bertalli, who's a Director of B&R Partners and an expert on franchising, I might add. Good morning, Jason, and welcome.
Yeah, morning, Mark. Thank you very much.
Well, Jason, I know we're going to have a chat about the franchise industry, but before we get into it, can you give us an outline of its history in the Australian arena?
Yeah, sure, Mark. Franchising began to take off here in the early 70s, with the most prominent being the typical American-styled fast food outlets such as KFC and McDonald's.
I remember that well. But anyway.
I think we all do. The concept gradually gained momentum and is now an industry of around 1,100 franchise systems with approximately 73,000 individual franchisees. It generates around about $13 billion per year.
$13 billion?
Yes, so it's quite a big industry.
So franchising's taken off as a concept. Why do you think it's been embraced by the business community to that extent?
It's a wide question. We need to look at it from both the view of the franchisor who owns the main business IP and the franchisee who pays the franchisor to operate under their brand.
Right.
Each party has different reasons for being attracted to franchising. So if I can start with the franchisors, there's a couple of main reasons that's a popular concept. I'll touch on the main three. Two of them are good and one isn't. So,
as is often the case in life, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I'll start with the positive. The main two positive drivers behind franchising your business are a lack of human capital or a lack of cash capital.
Right.
So when a successful business wishes to expand, they can contemplate setting up multiple sites for the business and employing managers or the like. That ensures all the profit remains with the owner and they are responsible for running the entire business. The issue many business owners face in this situation is finding good quality staff who are reliable and also treat the business as their own. They're very difficult to find. So what happens is the quality control becomes hard to maintain and the business begins to suffer brand damage. By setting up as a franchise model, the business owner receives a capital payment from the franchisee in lieu of a big percentage of that profit share. But what they do get is a running commission on the sales.
Yeah.
And also they get an owner, more importantly, who has some skin in the game.
Yeah, and a vested interest in making it work.
Yeah, so they have a greater vested interest in the success of the business than obviously a salaried employee would.
Okay, you mentioned cash before. Why is that a driver?
Because that's usually where the business lacks. Cash flow, obviously, as you know, is a very vital part of small business. So,
yep. And even more so these days, isn't it? In the sense that you haven't got the same leverage as big business and deferring it.
Yeah, exactly. Often the franchisor is a smaller business itself and doesn't have enough free cash to go after the expansion.
Right.
And as you know, lending policies of banks and other institutions to startups and SME markets at the moment is restricted, especially. Not historically known to throw buckets of money to small business.
Yep.
So the option of selling rights to use your brand allows expansion and market penetration without needing to bankroll the new sites yourself.
Okay.
Of course, in order to sell the idea and the franchise to the potential buyer, the business needs what we call proof of concept.
So what do we mean by proof of concept?
Okay, so if I want to sell my business model to you so that you can set up a new site, you're going to want to see some runs on the board from my current business to prove it has customers that want to pay.
Yep.
If I have just an idea and it hasn't been tested in the market, why would you gamble on it?
Because it may not be there. The market may not be there.
Exactly. So, and if you did gamble on it, you definitely wouldn't want to pay too much money for it because obviously it's like everything in life. You weigh up the risk and return. If I can prove to you, say, that a restaurant with a big yellow M at the front of it, for example, can guarantee a certain return, you can price that accordingly. It's a proven concept.
Yep. Okay. So you mentioned a third reason, which was less positive, as to why franchising's taken off. Can you lead us through that negative reason?
Yeah, definitely, Mark. As with any industry, all that glitters is not gold. While becoming less common now, especially with the upcoming changes to the franchising code of conduct, which I'll try and touch on later if I can, there are still people out there trying to take advantage of others. So the concept of a franchise appealing to newer, less financially educated business owners, some people are obviously out there trying to rip off and run by franchising a business.
And this is, I guess, key where if you're contemplating going to a franchise, you need to come to an accountant who has the nous to look at it holistically for you and its merits.
Yeah, it definitely helps to know that someone can have a look at the numbers and decide whether it's going to be worthwhile for you or not.
Yep.
What happens is, these scrupulous characters are told by someone, maybe a consultant, who's obviously of similar scrupulous character, that franchising is a business is a get-rich-quick scheme. So they come up with an idea. They don't worry about the proof of concept, get their teeth whitened, and start spruiking franchises for an unproven business model. They usually focus on like the lower end, cheaper entry points, and target those who have no business experience.
Okay.
So these are the ones. These are the guys you see on television when you're having your dinner. Usually, with a reporter chasing a luxury car down the street, yelling, "You're a rip-off," as the poor franchise investor stands there with a sullen look on their face.
Okay.
Like I said, luckily it's becoming less common because the ACCC is focusing on this and has brought out the franchising code of conduct.
So over time that will diminish, hopefully.
Yes. So,
well, that's definitely the ugly side of franchising, Jason. What's the positive side?
yeah, sorry, that was the doom and gloom bit. The good news is that franchises have a higher success rate than other small business startups. The reason for that is the reason you pay a franchisor a fee is that the marketing, the branding, operational systems, procedures and templates are all set up for running the business.
Yep.
You also get the support from other franchisees from the same business.
Yes.
So they're not working in against each other, they work together.
Yep.
And your franchisor is also going to offer you support because the more successful you are, the better, more successful.
Because they usually make a cut on the commission of sales.
Exactly.
So it's in everyone's interest to kind of work collectively.
Yeah, they get a percentage, so it's fantastic.
And I guess if you go into a large-scale franchise which has a public presence, you're going to get the benefit of advertising, aren't you, and all those like things,
Yep.
branding,
Yeah.
which is kind of key, isn't it, in growing any business.
Yeah, so,
You mentioned the code of conduct. Can we jump back to that? What is the code of conduct?
yeah, sure. Remembering, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll probably try to put it to layman's
You
terms.
sound like one occasionally.
I'll stick to what I do. The Code of Conduct is legislation that's designed to regulate the franchise industry. It covers basic principles such as acting in good faith, guidelines for disclosure documents for prospective franchisees, online sales for franchisees with territories, the use of marketing funds, risk statements for potential franchisees, right to terminate clauses, enforcement and restraint of trade clauses. Whilst the code is a dedicated discussion in itself, suffice to say that it's in place to help the franchisee industry keep on a level playing field for all parties.
Yep. And it is obviously needed given, as you said, there's unscrupulous characters out there who might, take advantage of others.
Yeah, it's a reputation maintenance objective.
So, as you may notice, Jason, I like food, so I'm aware there's some fast food giants that I frequent occasionally. What other kind of businesses get franchised?
Basically, Mark, if you can set a system to the business model, it can and probably has been franchised.
Right.
So businesses vary from the fast food giants, such as you just discussed, to car dealers, service stations, couriers, even service providers such as accountants and bookkeepers are now franchising their business.
That's pretty remarkable, isn't it?
In saying that, some franchises are much more successful than others for various reasons.
Okay. Well, you mentioned that some are successful, some are less so. What's the recipe for success or failure, you think, with any franchise?
As with all small business, there's no one recipe, but there's many factors that can affect the success of a franchise at either the franchisee level or the franchisor level.
Right.
There was an excellent article written by Peter Knight and Kate Groom on how to avoid the 7 things that send a franchise broke. And that was based on conversations from over 1,100 participants in the franchise industry.
Yep.
In that research, they discovered the main factors are, well, one...
this is for success or failure, is it?
Yes. So these factors depend on how successful your franchisee or franchisor would be.
Okay.
Not responsive to change. So they're like any small business. If you don't keep an eye on your industry and adapt to the variables, then you'll get left behind.
Yep.
Think of the impact of disruption from IT and fast internet on most current business models. Yeah, the old ostrich theory of sticking your head in the sand and it'll all go away does not work.
So having your antennae out's important, isn't it?
Yeah, just keeping a feeler out in the industry.
Yep.
So,
and what might be, for example, appropriate rates of return, for example?
Yeah, exactly.
In your particular industry?
Yeah, whether it's still up there or not.
Yeah, e.g. service stations have changed a lot over 20 years, for example.
Exactly.
Okay.
The other thing is, it might have had a difficult childhood. So some franchises are behind from the start. And they may have franchised for the wrong reason. Thus, the spruiker guy we spoke about earlier.
Yep.
They may have had too little capital to start off with.
Yes.
Or, the reality just simply does not match the initial dream. So it's like all investments, research and due diligence are not an option. You've really got to do your homework on these things.
And again, they need to probably often go to an expert on that.
Yeah, exactly. Another factor is lack of business rigour. So many franchisees have little business experience, and mixed with less than optimal support from a franchisor and not knowing that they need a specialised business advisor, for example, like specialised lawyers, specialised accountants, whatever, leads to business disaster through inexperience or neglect.
Yeah.
Which
is kind of emblematic of small business
yeah.
in a lot of ways, isn't it? You know, that sometimes you might go in with a dream, but you're not aware of some of the practical obstacles you're going to navigate around.
Exactly. Sometimes the business owners just do stupid things. So they get a little taste of success, they borrow heavily against that, and as a reward for their effort, they'll indulge themselves. You know, they'll go and buy a yacht, upgrade the family palace, that sort of thing, while they haven't actually got a really good finger on the pulse of the difference between cash flow and accruals.
Yep.
It does all come home to roost eventually. Not enough sales is often a big issue as well. Sometimes their forecasts are a little bit rose-coloured glasses, a bit optimistic.
Yep.
Or sometimes they're just wrong.
Could that be particularly a case with an industry that's changing radically? I'm thinking of like video stores, you know, which are kind of like dying, you know, an anomaly now almost, you know.
Exactly, and that comes into a lot of these factors. But yeah, losing demand for your entire product because it's been superseded by a new product, you've got to be able to sort of forecast that thing or at least see it coming.
Yeah,
so
and if you can adapt.
Adapt or get out.
Yeah.
Pride and ego is also a big issue. Successful business owners can often become a victim of their own success. So you shouldn't let pride and ego prevent you from seeking advice or admitting when something has run its course, like your video store, for example.
Yeah.
Just be ready to change direction, because if you keep sort of doggedly heading in the wrong direction, then eventually things are going to fall off.
Okay.
Or another one is, we'll go back to the cash flow scenario where they just can't pay their bills.
It's because they're not managing the cash flow appropriately?
Yeah, and a lot of business owners and franchisees are in that bucket, of course, is they don't know how to manage their cash flow. They don't do cash flow forecasting. They've come from a background where they've been receiving a constant wage every week, and the money's always been there. They've paid their bills. It's fantastic. They get themselves into a business, don't forecast for the cash. The first couple of months are fantastic because their bills aren't due for 90 days.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the bucket runs dry.
Yeah.
So it all gets ugly from there.
And I guess being responsive to economic circumstances, if we have a bit of a slowdown, that becomes more acute, doesn't it?
Oh, one of the biggest killers for small business and franchises, you know, as a whole is you have a bad time and you lose one big debtor.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you've spent the money, you've leveraged against it, and you don't collect yours, and that's where the cascade starts falling down. So
okay. Obviously, we've gone through some challenges for franchisers, but your view on it overall, in terms of franchising, is pretty positive, isn't it?
To be honest, I'm a bit of a fan of the concept. It's a good method for someone to get into business with a set of templated systems and procedures.
Yep.
It definitely helps their success rate. And more successful businesses, of course, are better clients for me, and they're more enjoyable for people to deal with from a business point of view.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So what's your firm's involvement in this space?
As specialists in the area, we deal with franchisors and franchisees, and also that we've got an extensive network in that space. So we can drag on the specialist lawyers, the demographic guys, and everything to help go through that. We're also founding members of a franchise accountants network, which is a national network around Australia that specialises in this area. And through that, we have accesses for practitioners or anyone else who needs to deal with a franchisee or a franchisor.
I guess there's something that's sharing experiences, isn't it? Particularly when you're doing something which is dynamic, which is what it is. So overall, for those listeners out there, what would you suggest they take on board if they're considering a franchise opportunity?
I think that franchises are a really solid way to people to get into business for themselves. Accountants traditionally haven't promoted the model due to a perceived lack of value in the initial startup, but with the regulation of the industry and the way that it's going now, I think franchises are fantastic. Yeah.
Okay. And I can see a lot of merit in it because it's almost like a bit of a safety net in some ways when you embark on a business career. And, you know, I think you made a point recently that you found a lot of people who might have been made redundant are actually contemplating what they should do in the next phase of life, and franchising looks like a palatable option.
The catch cry for the industry was always in business for yourself, not by yourself.
Yeah. I like that. We'll leave it on that one. I can't top that, Jason. Great to have you here as always, Jason. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Mark.
To learn more about this topic and our range of professional development options, including conferences, workshops, self-paced learning, webinars and in-house training, go to cpaaustralia.com.au/training. The information in this podcast is not advice. Any opinions expressed are those of the individual and do not represent the opinions of CPA Australia. You should always make your own inquiries before entering any transaction on the basis of the content of this podcast. CPA Australia will not be held responsible under any circumstances for damages arising from any use of this podcast.